Declaro abierta la sesión.
I call to order the 10,180th meeting of the Security Council. The provisional agenda for this meeting is United Nations Peacekeeping Operations. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Albania, Germany, Algeria, Andorra, Antigua and Barbuda, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belgium, Belize, Bhutan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Burundi, Cape Verde, Cambodia, Canada, Chad, Chile, Congo, Costa Rica, Côte d'Ivoire, Croatia, Djibouti, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, the United Arab Emirates, Eritrea, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, the Federated States of Micronesia, Estonia, Ethiopia, Fiji, the Philippines, Finland, Gabon, Georgia, Guatemala, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Hungary, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Iceland, the Marshall Islands, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Northern Macedonia, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Morocco, Mexico, Monaco, Mongolia, Montenegro, Mozambique, Namibia, Nepal, Nigeria, Norway, New Zealand, Oman, Palau, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Syrian Arab Republic, the Central African Republic, the Republic of Korea, the Republic of Moldova, the Dominican Republic, the United Republic of Tanzania, Romania, St. Kitts and Nevis, Samoa, San Marino, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Senegal, Serbia, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Sudan, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, Tajikistan, East Timor, Togo, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, Uganda, Uruguay, Uzbekistan, Vietnam, Yemen, and Zimbabwe to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Council is ready to proceed. We'll go to review item 2 on the agenda. Members of the Council have before it document S/2026/488, which includes the text of a draft resolution introduced by Albania, Germany, Andorra, Antigua and Barbuda, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belgium, Belize, Bhutan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Burundi, Cape Verde, Cambodia, Canada, Chad, Czechia, Chile, China, Cyprus, Colombia, Congo, Costa Rica, Côte d'Ivoire, Croatia, Denmark, Djibouti, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, the United Arab Emirates, Eritrea, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, the Federated States of Micronesia, Estonia, Ethiopia, Fiji, the Philippines, Finland, France, Gabon, Georgia, Ghana, Greece, Guatemala, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Hungary, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Iceland, the Marshall Islands, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Kuwait, Latvia, Lebanon, Liberia, Libya, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Northern Macedonia, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Morocco, Mexico, Monaco, Mongolia, Montenegro, Mozambique, Namibia, Nepal, Nigeria, Norway, New Zealand, Oman, Pakistan, Palau, Panama, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Syrian Arab Republic, the Central African Republic, the Republic of Korea, the Republic of Moldova, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Dominican Republic, the United Republic of Tanzania, Romania, St. Kitts and Nevis, Samoa, San Marino, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Senegal, Serbia, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Sudan, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, Tajikistan, Timor-Leste, Togo, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, Uganda, Uruguay, Uzbekistan, Vietnam, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall now give the floor to members of the Council that wish to make a statement before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Tiene usted la palabra.
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Together with Denmark, Pakistan has the honor to introduce the draft resolution before the Council on accountability for crimes against United Nations peacekeepers. I wish to thank Denmark for our close partnership on this vital initiative. Initially with the Republic of Korea as a trio in 2025, Pakistan and Denmark have continued to work together as the Security Council's peace operations duo in 2026 to keep the Council's focus on peacekeeping, which is one of the most important instruments for the maintenance of international peace and security. Madam President, United Nations peacekeeping represents the collective commitment of the UN membership to international peace and security. And over decades, member states from across all regions have contributed personnel, capabilities, and resources to peacekeeping operations. Nearly 4,500 UN peacekeepers, representing the international community, have lost their lives in the line of duty. This includes 183 Pakistani peacekeepers. We pay highest tribute to the ultimate sacrifice made by all of them. For Denmark and Pakistan, as indeed for the record number of member states co-sponsoring and supporting this initiative, and you read out the list, Madam President, the issue of accountability for crimes against peacekeepers carries utmost importance. Pakistan is one of the largest and longest-serving troop-contributing countries to UN peacekeeping. More than 270,000 Pakistani peacekeepers have served under the UN flag over the decades. We therefore appreciate the human cost of peacekeeping and know that safety and security of peacekeepers can be enhanced through strengthened accountability. Pakistan has also consistently contributed to the development of peacekeeping policy at the UN. In 2013, Pakistan led the adoption of landmark Resolution 2086 on multidimensional peacekeeping, which was the first comprehensive resolution of this Council focused on peacekeeping. The draft before the Council today carries on that tradition, and it also builds directly on Resolutions 2518 and 2589, sponsored by China and India, respectively, which strengthened the Council's engagement on the safety and security of peacekeepers and accountability for crimes committed against them. Madam President, across several missions, attacks against UN peacekeepers have increased in number and sophistication. Peacekeepers are being targeted, often with little accountability. This draft resolution seeks to move the Council beyond statements condemning these attacks. Council's pronouncements are important. Condolences are necessary, but they are not enough. When peacekeepers are killed or injured as a result of attacks while performing mandates authorized by this Council, then the Council must remain seized of what happens next. Whether facts are established, whether investigations are being pursued, whether perpetrators have been identified, and whether justice is done. Impunity for such crimes cannot be allowed to fester. There must be accountability. The draft resolution before the Council contains practical measures to address gaps in existing accountability framework. It requests the Secretary General to report to the Council on an annual basis on the status of investigations and prosecutions in cases involving killing of and acts of violence against UN personnel serving in peacekeeping operations. It also requests the Secretary General to provide options within 120 days on the way forward to strengthen the accountability framework for crimes against peacekeepers. This will help the Council assess as to what is working, where gaps remain, and what further action may be required. Among other important steps, the draft resolution will also lead to designation of a senior focal point in the Secretariat to improve coordination, follow-up, engagement with host states and troop and police contributing countries, and effective use of existing mechanisms to enhance accountability. Most importantly, this resolution is a strong expression of the Council's political will to stand by peacekeepers it mandates and deploys. It sends a clear message. Our men and women who serve under the UN flag will have the Council's full backing. Attacks against them will not be met with silence or impunity. Madam President, Denmark and Pakistan thank the Council members for their constructive engagement on the text. We listened carefully to the views expressed during the negotiations process and have sought to produce a balanced, focused, and implementable text. We are also highly and deeply grateful to the wider UN membership, including the troop and police contributing countries from across the globe, for extending their invaluable support. The draft resolution has been co-sponsored by over 150 member states, a record number reflecting the interest of the broader membership in this subject and the weight it brings to ensuring accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. Madam President, Pakistan and Denmark look forward to unanimous adoption of the draft resolution. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the delegate of Pakistan for the statement. I shall now give the floor We shall now proceed to a vote. Those in favor of the draft resolution in the document S/2026/488, please raise your hand. The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2823 of 2026. I shall now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Denmark was pleased to co-lead negotiations in a very constructive partnership with Pakistan on today's resolution as part of our continued and sustained cooperation through the Peace Operations duo. At the outset, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to all Council members for their constructive engagement, flexibility, and commitments throughout the negotiation process, which has led to the adoption this morning of Resolution 2823. The unanimous support for this resolution sends a strong and important message. To the over 50,000 personnel currently serving in peacekeeping missions across the globe, from Lebanon over Cyprus to South Sudan and the Central African Republic, it sends a message of solidarity, that this Council, this body which sets their mandate, stands firmly behind them. To the troop and police contributing countries, many of whom have co-sponsored today's resolution, who deploy their most precious resource in support of peace, it sends a message of reassurance that in the event of any crime against their peacekeepers, this Council and the United Nations systems is ready, willing, and able to step in. And to the perpetrators of any crimes, wherever and whoever they are, it sends a firm message that the international community is watching, that crimes will not go unpunished, that accountability and justice will be pursued and will be upheld. Madam President, United Nations peacekeeping represents the promise of the Charter in action. It is the affirmation that peace is a global good and that it is fundamentally a collective commitment and a shared endeavor. We're therefore particularly grateful to the more than 150 member states from all regions, representing the majority of this entire organization, that joined us as co-sponsors of this critical resolution. Your support demonstrates the broad commitment of the international community to strengthen the safety and security of those who serve under the United Nations flag, often in the most difficult and dangerous circumstances. But it is more than symbolic. This resolution is practical and implementable. It seeks to fill accountability gaps, support investigations and prosecutions, and improve coordination across the United Nations systems. Colleagues, the adoption of today's resolution should not be understood as an endpoint, rather as the beginning of a renewed phase of commitment and a foundation for continued action. By requesting further options from the Secretary-General, the Council has recognized that strengthening accountability and protecting peacekeepers requires sustained attention and continuous improvement. We look forward to receiving those proposals, to considering them, and to working together to translate them into meaningful progress. In closing, Madam President, let me pay tribute to the brave women and men serving under the blue flag. For more than 7 decades, they have been maintaining peace and security, protecting civilians, and supporting political processes around the world. Nearly 4,500 of them have paid the ultimate price. Today's resolutions honor their sacrifice. Denmark and Pakistan look forward to continued cooperation with all member states and relevant stakeholders in implementing this resolution and translating its commitments into concrete action. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative, the ambassador of Denmark, for her statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor, sir.
President, United Nations peacekeeping operations are an important means for maintaining international peace and security. As a strong supporter of peacekeeping, a major troop contributing country, and co-chair of the Group of Friends on the Safety and Security of UN Peacekeepers, China attaches great importance to the safety and security of peacekeeping personnel. We welcome the unanimous adoption a while ago of the Security Council Resolution 2823 and commend the pen holders Denmark and Pakistan for their efforts in promoting this resolution. This demonstrates the solidarity, unity in action by the Council and the universal support of the international community. In the current complex and convoluted international security context, peacekeeping personnel faces severe threats, both traditional and non-traditional, as exemplified inter alia in the multiple recent attacks resulting in casualties among peacekeepers. Given the unsatisfying progress in investigation and accountability, it is therefore both necessary and urgent for the Security Council to take further action. Any deliberate attack against peacekeeping personnel constitutes a serious violation of international humanitarian law and relevant Security Council resolutions. China supports the adoption of this resolution and its effective implementation so as to send a clear message to the international community that the safety and security of peacekeepers is inviolable and that the perpetrators shall be punished to the fullest extent of the law. China paid the highest tribute to all the UN personnel in the service of PKOs and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for the global peace cause. China actively participates in UN peacekeeping operations as the second largest financial contributor to UN peacekeeping and the largest troop contributing country among the permanent members of the Security Council. To date, China has deployed more than 50,000 peacekeepers in total, participated in 29 UN peacekeeping missions authorized by the Security Council, established an 8,000-strong standby peacekeeping force, and taken the lead in forming the world's first formed standby police unit for peacekeeping. More than 20 Chinese peacekeepers have made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of peace, including one female peacekeeping police officer. China stands ready to continue close cooperation with the Secretariat, host countries, and other TCCs and PCCs to implement this resolution, take concrete actions to cement a line of defense for the safety of the blue helmets, and make greater contributions to the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you, President.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Liberia thanks Denmark and Pakistan for their leadership on this resolution, which we proudly co-sponsored and voted for. From ECOMOG through UNMIL, peacekeepers enabled Liberia's transition from conflict to democracy. Liberians remember with profound gratitude and deep regret the 200 personnel who lost their lives on our soil to safeguard our lives. While we cannot restore those lost lives, Liberia joins this resolution to ensure the safety of all active peacekeepers is protected and respected. Shielding these guardians through strict accountability is indispensable, as attacks against them violate international humanitarian law and, rightly so, constitute war crimes. In closing, Madam President, peacekeepers once secured the Liberian nation. It is now our honored duty to secure theirs. This Council must continue to match the service and sacrifice of peacekeepers with absolute and deserved accountability. I thank you for your kind attention.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of Liberia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you very much, Madam President. Panama voted in favor of the resolution that we have just adopted because it considers that the safety of UN personnel that is deployed in peacekeeping operations constitutes an indispensable element for the effective application of the mandates of this Council. The men and women that serve under the UN flag often work in complex and highly volatile contexts. They face risks to their security on a constant basis. Recent incidents registered in operations such as UNIFIL, MINUSCA, and UNISFA are a reminder that attacks against peacekeeping personnel continue to be a real threat for those that on a daily basis work for international peace and stability. Panama considers that attacks against UN staff should not be unpunished. Accountability constitutes a critical element for justice for victims and families, and it is also a critical prevention tool. When the perpetrators of these acts do not face consequences, the safety of missions is weakened and their capacity to implement mandates entrusted by this Council is undermined. We also recognize that the threats faced by peacekeeping operations have evolved considerably in recent years. The use of IEDs, unmanned aerial systems, and other emerging technologies demands that we constantly adapt missions' safety and protection capacities. Therefore, we value that the resolution reflects current operational realities and promotes a more effective response to these challenges. Finally, our country considers that it is positive that the adopted text has a balanced and practical approach, strengthening cooperation mechanisms as well as mechanisms for accountability and investigation. At the same time, it recognizes the critical role of host states and the need to work within existing structures of the UN system. Panama thanks Denmark and Pakistan for their leadership throughout this process, and we reaffirm our commitment with efforts to enhance the safety of peacekeeping personnel and to fight impunity for attacks against them. I thank you. I thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we thank the co-authors for the initiative they showed when they brought to the Security Council's agenda the issue of accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. Peacekeeping remains one of the key instruments in the UN arsenal when it comes to conflict resolution. The blue helmets are discharging their noble duty in very difficult and dangerous conditions. They risk their lives on a daily basis. We pay tribute to the memory of all peacekeepers who lost their lives. Unfortunately, recently, the issue of ensuring the safety and security of the blue helmets is becoming increasingly relevant because attacks against them are increasingly frequent. At the same time, information about successful investigations and punishment of perpetrators is something that we hardly hear about. In March of 2022, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, together with the colleagues from Serbia and Pakistan, a senior military observer, Russian officer Alexei Miura, perished as a result of shelling from a helicopter. The perpetrators of this crime were never brought to justice. Madam President, we did support this resolution for following reasons. First of all, this resolution will send a very clear signal by the international community that the fact that there is a UN peacekeeping presence has to be taken by all parties to the conflict very seriously, and the safety and security of the blue helmets is inviolable, and violations in this area will be followed by an inevitable punishment. Secondly, the resolution confirms the right of the host country to have assistance provided to them when it comes to building their own capacity for conducting effective investigations of crimes against peacekeepers. After all, it is the host country which bears a primary responsibility for the security and safety of the blue helmets on its territory. It is our view that the decision to appoint a senior focal point on accountability for crimes against blue helmets as well as a yearly report by the Secretary General about the investigations of such crimes, will ensure that there is sustainable attention given to this issue at a proper level and will help obtain long-awaited justice for the peacekeepers who lost their lives. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the delegate of the Russian Federation for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom welcomes the unanimous adoption of this resolution, and we thank Denmark and Pakistan for their efforts. This resolution makes clear that accountability for attacks against United Nations personnel serving in peacekeeping operations is essential. This year has seen unacceptable attacks on blue helmets. Our deepest sympathies are with the families of those killed and injured. We stress the importance of ensuring that investigations into recent incidents progress. And we commend the courage and professionalism of personnel serving in UN peacekeeping operations. Finally, President, the United Kingdom is committed to ensuring that UN peacekeeping remains an effective tool in support of international peace and security. And we look forward to receiving the Secretary-General's report on the future of all forms of peace operations. I thank you.
I thank the delegate of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to Bahrain. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Madam President. At the beginning of my statement, I would like to thank the Islamic Republic of Pakistan as well as the Kingdom of Denmark as drafters for the efforts deployed to prepare the resolution that we have adopted today on accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. Madam President, we have voted in favor of the draft resolution because we are firmly convinced that it is necessary to exert concerted efforts internationally to protect the staff of PKOs that play a key role to enhance international peace and security. I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to pay tribute to all staff working in peacekeeping operations, and this includes our blue helmets. I would like to sincerely express my condolences to the families of all those that lost their lives in the exercise of their functions. This resolution completes Resolution 2518 and 2589 and reaffirm the key role played by the Security Council, not just to adopt mandates, but also in the follow-up of their implementation, as well as the protection of all staff in different stages of the aforementioned implementation. To conclude, the Kingdom of Bahrain will continue supporting all international efforts in order to enhance the protection of PKO staff to uphold peace, security, stability, and regional peace. Thank you, Madam President. I thank the delegation of Bahrain for the statement. There are no further names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Declaro abierta la sesión número.
I call to order meeting number 10,181 of the Security Council. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Central African Republic. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Central African Republic to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Valentine Rugwabiza, the Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, and His Excellency Mr. Omar Hilal, Permanent Representative of Morocco to the United Nations in his capacity as Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2026/494, the report of the Secretary General on the Central African Republic. I now give the floor to Ms. Valentine Rugwabiza.
Tiene usted la palabra.
You have the floor, ma'am.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, Ambassador Ilal, Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission and the Central African Republic Configuration, Ambassador Zeswe, Permanent Representative of the Central African Republic. Madam President, I would like to congratulate Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of June. I'm honored to present the latest report of the Secretary General on the situation in the Central African Republic and to provide an update on recent political and security developments and the mission reconfiguration of its footprint. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, this briefing comes 4 years after my first briefing to this Council as Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of MINUSCA in June 2022. It is with a sense of deep gratitude that I address this Council today for its sustained support to the mission and to our host country, the Central African Republic. I'm pleased to report that 4 years down the road, the Central African Republic has made remarkable and tangible progress towards lasting peace and security, with the instrumental support of MINUSCA. This progress would not have been possible without a close and constant cooperation built on trust and respect between the mission and our host country. My gratitude goes to the people and the government of the Central African Republic for the exceptional cooperation extended to myself and the mission. The progress made with the implementation of the political and peace processes, the effective extension of state authority and presence across the Central African Republic territory, the protection of civilians, the preparation and conduct of historic couple elections in December 2025 is all the result of sustained efforts by the Central African authorities and people with the multidimensional support of MINUSCA. These gains must now be preserved and consolidated. Madam President, the Central African Republic has reached another decisive milestone towards the full completion of the 2025-2026 electoral cycle. On 26 April 2026, the second round of legislative, regional, and municipal elections, as well as by-elections, were successfully conducted, including in the few areas where voting could not take place in December 2025. In a country where elections have too often been associated with tensions and cycles of violence, this is a clear indication of institutional stability. the inauguration of President Faustin Archange Touadéra on 30th of March, the installation of the 8th legislature of the National Assembly on 4th of May, and the formation of the first government of the Seventh Republic on 21st of May, further underscore this progress. The local elections contributed to improving inclusive governance, with an increase to 45% of women elected municipal councillors, including the newly elected mayor of Bangui, the capital city. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, while the security situation has generally improved across the country over the years, it remains fragile, mainly in several border areas. In the Northeast, the impact of the conflict in Sudan is of particular concern, with renewed armed activity along the border, including cross-border incursions targeting civilians, particularly in the Bakaga prefecture. In the Southeast, the attacks and abductions by the AAKG militia continue to be a source of insecurity in the Ombumu and Bumu prefectures. MINUSCA continues to work closely with the government to protect civilians and further consolidate the extension of state authority. However, the sustainability of security gains requires significant investment in the national security sector and institutions, including for the sustainment of troops deployed in operations in remote areas, construction and maintenance of national defense and security bases, training of troops and officers, operational, logistical, and mobility capabilities, reinforcement of defense and security governance and accountability mechanisms, among other security sector priorities. There is a need for a comprehensive and detailed plan to address critical gaps in the capabilities of the security sector. A plan based on strong national ownership with the support of international partners. This is critical to ensuring that the mandated gradual transfer of MINUSCA security tasks to national defense and security forces will not risk strategic reversal of security achievements. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, MINUSCA has redoubled efforts to consolidate and rationalize its operational footprint in line with our political strategy and updated concepts of operation of MINUSCA's force and police. Between January and June 2026, the mission has completed the closure of 21 bases, including 7 permanent operating bases and 14 temporary operating bases located in stabilized areas, allowing for a more agile and mobile posture to focus on most fragile areas. MINUSCA also closed 3 field offices, as well as one of our 3-man compounds in Bangui, generating both savings and integration gains between uniform and civilian components. In addition, MINUSCA handed over a number of static security positions to national counterparts in Bangui. The success of this reconfiguration and MINUSCA's more mobile concept of operation hinges on enablers, particularly aviation capacity, given limited infrastructure and an 8-month rainy season in the Central Africa. On 10th of June, an official handover ceremony of 7 MINUSCA bases to the Central African government co-led by the Prime Minister and myself, was organized in Baiki, in the Lobai Prefecture. This marked a new milestone in the consolidation of gains and gradual transfer of tasks and responsibilities to national authorities in support of restoration of state authority and strengthening of national capabilities. The process of identification of tasks to be gradually handed over to the government is being done in close coordination between the mission and the government, under the oversight of an interministerial committee chaired by the Prime Minister. This process is conducted through joint planning by the government and the mission to ensure both national ownership and that the process is informed by the realities on the ground. Madam President, I would like to conclude by expressing my deep gratitude to the civilian and uniformed personnel of MINUSCA for their dedication, commitment, resilience during an extraordinarily demanding and challenging year for the mission. I thank troop and police contributing countries for their unwavering commitment to peace, security, and stability in the Central African Republic. I also thank the UN country team for their essential contribution to our shared stabilization mission in the Central African Republic. I thank you for your kind attention.
Doy las gracias a las
I thank Ms. Rugwabiza for her briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Omar Hilal. You have the floor, sir.
Madam the President, at the outset, on behalf of the Peacebuilding Commission and in my capacity as Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission and the Central African Republic Configuration, I would like to thank the members of the Security Council for giving an invitation to brief on my visit to Bangui, which took place from 28 March to 3rd of April 2026. A detailed report of that visit has been already circulated to the Council members. I wish to express our heartfelt gratitude to His Excellency Sir Faustin Archange Touadéra, President of the Central African Republic, for the warm welcome extended to our delegation and for the quality of the exchange we had in Bangui. I also wish to commend the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Valentine Reguabiza, and the entire leadership of MINUSCA for their warm welcome and their steadfast support throughout our mission. My tribute goes equally to the Assistant Secretary General for Peace Building and Peace Support, Mrs. Elizabeth Spear, and to distinguished representatives of Bangladesh, Colombia, France, Germany, and the Russian Federation, who joined our delegation and thus engagement enriched every stage of the visit. Madam President, the visit was particularly significant in both its timing and its scope. Our diverse and representative delegation convoyed to all our interlocutors from the government, state institutions, international organizations, UN agencies, diplomatic corps, as well as electoral bodies, members of civil society, including women leaders and youth representatives, a strong and unified signal that the international community remains fully committed to accompanying the Central African Republic at this decisive juncture. Its timing was equally telling, coinciding with the investiture of President Touadéra and the Seventh Republic, a current ceremony I attended alongside Assistant Secretary General Spear, which lent added weight to our message of sustained partnership. During the visit, we held separate meetings with His Excellency President Touadéra, Prime Minister, and senior government officials. with the President of the Constitutional Council, the National Electoral Authority, Special Criminal Courts, and the Truth, Justice, Reparation, and Reconciliation Commission, and the High Authority for Communication, with the senior leadership of MINUSCA and the United Nations country team, with the representative of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank, the European Union, and the diplomatic corps, and with members of civil society, including women leaders and youth representatives. The delegation also traveled to Bouar, where we met local authorities and visited projects supported by Peace Building Fund, PBF, focused on durable solutions for displaced population, social cohesion, and youth engagement. Madam President, the South African Republic has made significant and commendable progress, a conclusion on which our meetings in Bangui and Bouar revealed a broad and genuine consensus. Interlocutors pointed above all to the return of peace and stability across most of the national territory and the continued implementation of 2019 political agreement for peace and reconciliation, to the peaceful and orderly conduct of December 2025 presidential, legislative, regional, and local elections, and to the return of several armed groups to the peace process during 2025, accompanied by the extensive disarmament and demobilization that followed, and to meaningful advances in transitional justice, including the cooperation protocol signed between the Special Criminal Court and Truth, Justice, Reparation, and Reconciliation Commission. On several occasions, the December elections were described as the most orderly and peaceful in the country's history, combining presidential, legislative, regional, and municipal polls, including the first local election in nearly 40 years. They represented a major logistical security and financial achievement. Their successful conduct reflected strong national ownership while demonstrating the government's ability to rally the United Nations and international partners behind shared democratic objectives. At the same time, national and international interlocutors alike were unanimous. These achievements must be preserved and consolidated. Border and security, particularly regional spillover, tension linked to transhumance, continuing reintegration needs, the continued strengthening of state authority across the territory, security sector reform, the further building of institutional capacity, and the creation of conditions for sustainable long-term development all remains area where steady accompaniment will prove valuable. The Central African Republic is entering a particularly promising phase in which the Central African challenges is to build upon recent progress and to render it durable. One of the clearest and most consistent messages of the visit was the continued centrality of MINUSCA in preserving and consolidating the gains of 11 years of United Nations peacekeeping presence in support to the government's priorities and the quest for peace of CAR people. This was affirmed emphatically by the government representative, local authorities, and international partners alike. His Excellency President Touadéra underscored that given the fragility of recent gains, the Central African Republic considers MINUSCA's continued accompaniment highly indispensable. He requested that the Peacebuilding Commission, consistent with its advisory role and its bridging function with the other principal organs, convey this perspective to the Security Council. It's done now. The mission leadership warned that further predictions, if implemented over a compressed time frame, could jeopardize the preservation of recent gains. I was informed that while MINUSCA's footprint is already evolving, both in response to liquidity constraints and in the light of developing realities on the ground, this is a moment for consolidation and not disengagement. Not only does the mission support continue to be critical in the domains of security, protection, good office, institutional capacity, the rule of law, and the extension of state authority, but its logistical apparatus, including MINUSCA's air assets, also continue to provide vital support to national and international operations in countries with significant access constraints owing to limited road network. A view broadly shared among interlocutors was that any future evolution of MINUSCA's configuration should be carefully sequenced, firmly guided by conditions on the ground and informed by close consultations with the government and the relevant partners. Madam President, the visit also confirmed the strategic relevance of PBF. We were able to witness firsthand the impact of the fund in Bangui, particularly in relation to the electoral process and its strategic relationship with MINUSCA. In support of the process, interlocutors explained that the fund support had helped reinforce key institutions and mechanisms, including the Constitutional Council and the consultative framework, and had supported women's participation and effort to prevent electoral violence. Madam President, further theme that emerged consistently from the visit was the Central African Republic is entering a new phase in which national and international efforts are increasingly oriented toward visible transformation and sustainable development. The Prime Minister and other interlocutors underscores the importance of the timely materialization of pledges made by partners at the Casablanca National Development Plan Investment Roundtable, hosted by the Kingdom of Morocco in September 2025. Our discussions with the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, African Development Bank, and the European Union reflected growing momentum for stronger complementarity between peace building and development financing, including through an innovative joint strategic alignment exercise that brought these institutions together within a coordinated peace-building framework. Madam President, allow me now to share the main observation that emerged from our visit to Bangui. Firstly, the Central African Republic needs the sustained support and accompaniment of the Security Council now more than ever. While the country has entered a decisive and promising phase, it has not yet reached a self-sustaining trajectory. The window of opportunity opened by electoral cycle and by progress in the peace process must be seized and consolidated through coherent and continued international engagement, but not at the expense of the security dividends achieved through years of collective effort which remain fragile and require sustained support. Secondly, MINUSCA remains a central pillar of the current architecture, and its continued presence is considered indispensable by the government and the people of Central African Republic. MINUSCA's proactive approach toward reconfiguration in the post-electoral context is welcomed. Yet, the mission continues to face liquidity constraints, risking mandate delivery. Member States should pay their dues in full and on time to ensure that MINUSCA can fulfill the mandate it has been given by this Council. Any future adjustment of the mission must be gradual, guided by conditions on the ground, and sequenced in close consultation with national authorities and partners. A premature or compressed transition would risk the very gain and investment that years of engagement have made possible. Thirdly, reintegration is among the most urgent remaining peace-building priorities. Disarmament and demobilization must be accompanied by sustained socio-economic investment, credible peace, dividend, and community-level reconciliation. Adequate and predictable financing will be essential to sustain this phase, and the complementarity between the Peacebuilding Fund and MINUSCA should continue to be leveraged to bridge critical funding gaps for reintegration programming. Area-based development approaches are needed to create functioning local economies into which ex-combatants and their families can integrate sustainably. The situation of young people associated with armed groups who fall outside formal eligibility criteria for the national DDR program also merits particular attention by the Council. Fourthly, transitional justice must be supported as strategic priority for long-term peace consolidation. The Special Criminal Courts and the Truth, Justice, Reparation, and the Reconciliation Commission are making meaningful progress, and the implementation of the cooperation protocol between these two institutions is a positive development that should be nurtured. This requires continued financial and operational support, without which this transitional justice mechanism won't live up to the legitimate expectations of victims. Fifthly, the evolution from stabilization to development must be carefully managed, encouraging that peace building remains an essential bridge. The pledges made at Casablanca Roundtable must be translated into concrete, timely disbursement. Without the rapid mobilization of additional financing, including through international financing institutions, regional development bank, and bilateral partners, the sustainability of recent gains could be jeopardized. This requires encouraging stronger alignment between development financing and nationally owned peace-building priorities. Sixthly, the Peacebuilding Commission stands ready to deepen its strategic engagement with Central African Republic over the longer term. In line with the Peacebuilding Architecture Review resolutions, the Commission is well placed to sustain political attention, to strengthen coherence between peacebuilding and development, and to support gradual evolution of international engagement. In this spirit, I conveyed to the President Touadéra the Commission's readiness to welcome his participation in future meetings in New York, an invitation that he warmly accepted. In conclusion, I wish to pay tribute to Special Representative Rugwabiza and the entire MINUSCA team for their dedication, professionalism, and tireless commitment to the people of the Central African Republic. I also wish to express my deep appreciation to MINUSCA's deputy, the SRSG, and resident and humanitarian coordinator, and the United Nations country team. This integrated approach to peacebuilding and development is making a real and tangible difference on the ground. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to Assistant Secretary General SPR for her valuable support and continued engagement on the situation in the Central African Republic. The priority in the period ahead must be to sustain momentum, preserve coherence of support, and ensure a gradual condition-based evolution of international engagement that protects recent gains and helps translate them into more durable peace and development for all Central Africans. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Doy las gracias al
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hilal for the briefing provided. I will now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank, first of all, Ms. Valentine Rugwabiza, Special Representative. I thank her for her presentation and for her leadership of MINUSCA. And also would like to thank the Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, His Excellency Mr. Hilal, I thank him for his presentation of the overall situation. And I also welcome the presence among us of the permanent representative of the Central African Republic. Madam President, we wonder sometimes about the usefulness of peacekeeping operations. What has been achieved in the Central African Republic in front of our eyes demonstrates that these operations are effective and in some respects irreplaceable instruments. With the support of MINUSCA, of this Council, and the international community, the Central African Republic is continuing down its path, which is not without challenges, but towards a return to peace and security. The successful holding of the presidential, legislative, regional, municipal elections in December 2025 and April 2026 is a new stage in terms of governance and restoring state sovereignty over the entire territory. And this was made possible thanks to the coordinated efforts of the Central African authorities and MINUSCA. The mission has contributed to securing the elections and to meeting major logistical and operational challenges so as to facilitate access to the most remote areas in accordance with the mandate issued by this Council. While the new Central African government has been appointed, there are several challenges that lie ahead. It will have to deal with a security situation which remains fragile, particularly in northeast and southeast of the country, and the repercussions of the conflict in Sudan and the intercommunal clashes are destabilizing factors that call for this Council to remain vigilant. A consolidation of the progress made in the recent years is necessary to ensure that the restoration of stability in the Central African Republic is sustainable. The challenges that I've mentioned, in order to be met, require additional efforts in the area of the security sector. The challenge for the Central African Republic is to strengthen as soon as possible its institutional and operational capacities to fully shoulder its security responsibilities. There are two other areas which require special attention for long-term stability: the completion of disarmament, demobilization and reintegration activities, and the extension of state authority throughout the territory, on the other hand. All of this must go hand in hand with a renewed commitment to the fight against impunity and respect for human rights. Madam President, it's a responsibility of this Council to support and accompany the Central African Republic in this new phase of consolidation. And MINUSCA plays a central role here. Its decisive contribution to the progress achieved is all the more remarkable given that, like all United Nations operations, it's facing unprecedented liquidity constraints. Significant efforts have been made to adapt the mission's posture and to enable it to continue, despite difficulties, to implement its mandate. And for the future, any gradual and orderly transfer of peacekeeping responsibilities to the national authorities will have to be carried out in coordination with the Central African government, depending on the progress made in consolidating the gains made and the development of the situation on the ground. And we will keep as our guide the long-term stability of the Central African Republic. In addition, this Council took measures in 2024 against armed groups and associated individuals under the 2745 regime. These measures make it possible to impede the supply of weapons and the movement of armed groups, and they are complementary in this to the efforts made by the Central African government to encourage these groups to join in good faith the peace process. Madam President, to conclude, France calls on international partners to mobilize to provide political and financial support for this consolidation process, as well as for the longer-term development of the Central African Republic, so as to contribute to the lasting return to peace and security in the Central African Republic. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank SRSG Rukwa Biza and the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, Ambassador Hilale of Morocco, for their briefings, and welcome the permanent representative of the Central African Republic to this meeting. Madam President, allow me to make 3 points. First, Denmark welcomes the formation of a new national government in the Central African Republic on 22nd May. This represents the culmination of sustained political commitment and democratic agency. Denmark thanks MINUSCA for its exceptional contribution to an overall safe and credible electoral process, including its efforts to create conditions for the participation of women as voters, candidates, election officials, and civil society actors. We equally welcome the new government's proactive decision to establish a transition committee with the MINUSCA. Only a serious, deliberate, and nationally owned process can support the authorities in successfully assuming the responsibilities carried out by MINUSCA. Denmark encourages the mission and the government of the Central African Republic to pursue this work with the care and ambition it deserves, while embedding women, peace, and security commitments throughout this transition to strengthen the legitimacy, sustainability, and long-term peace. Second, Madam President, we must acknowledge what remains unfinished within the peace agreement and that significant security challenges persist. As we've heard, in the north, the spillover of the war in Sudan continues to destabilize the Wakaga region and create new weapon smuggling routes into a country that is working hard to disarm. In the southeast, civilian populations also remain exposed to violence. Currently, MINUSCA plays a vital and irreplaceable role in providing protection to civilians in both regions. These realities must weigh in heavily in any transition planning. This process cannot be driven by political timelines. It must be grounded in the actual situation on the ground and the capacity of the CAR armed forces and police to protect civilians and secure the country's borders. In this regard, Denmark underscores the importance of ensuring the mission has the resources and operational enablers it needs, including air assets and fully operationalized quick reaction forces. Third, the international community must remain engaged in support of the Central African Republic's transition. Encouraging signs of progress are visible, but the extension of state authority throughout the country is still incomplete. The same is true for the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of armed elements. To this end, it is essential that the international community continues to support the CAR authorities in building the capacity of their national police and armed forces. We also emphasize the need for continued support for the severe humanitarian situation with approximately 2 million people facing acute food insecurity and more than 400,000 internally displaced. Madam President, in closing, MINUSCA and the people of the Central African Republic have much to be proud of. Elections have been held, a government has been formed, and early transition planning is underway. Now is the time to consolidate these gains and to prepare carefully for the next steps. Let us make sure that we do so at a pace that reflects the realities on the ground. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
President, and I express my gratitude to SRSG Valentin Ruguabisa for her comprehensive briefing and more broadly for her steadfast leadership of MINUSCA throughout the pivotal period for the Central African Republic. I also thank Ambassador Omar Hilale, the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for his valuable update and welcome the participation of the representative of the Central African Republic in today's meeting. Madam President, back in February, we lauded what we called the noteworthy exercise of democratic choice demonstrated by the people of the Central African Republic. Today, we are pleased to see that this democratic expression has translated into the successful establishment of national institutions with the formation of a new government and the installation of a new National Assembly following a generally peaceful electoral period. We commend the authorities, political stakeholders, and citizens of the Central African Republic for their commitment to stability throughout this process. We further encourage continued efforts to establish local governance mechanisms, broaden civic space, and strengthen the inclusion of all segments of society in public life. As underscored during the stakeout earlier on, we are confident that the contribution of newly elected women officials and representatives will be essential in advancing these goals. At the same time, the successful completion of the electoral cycle should now serve as a catalyst for the enhanced implementation of the peace agreement, particularly with regard to the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, and repatriation process. The achievements witnessed during the electoral period also underscore the indispensable role played by MINUSCA. The confidence placed by this Council in the mission's ability to support the electoral process has borne tangible results. As the mission adapts its deployment to evolving fiscal and operational realities, it is essential that the international community ensure that the reconfiguration is matched by the resources, mobility capabilities, and political support necessary for MINUSCA to fulfill its mandate effectively. We are encouraged by the demonstrated commitment to cooperation between the mission and the new government, which provides a positive foundation for the next phase of political and security developments while helping address the significant challenges that remain. Security threats continue to be particularly acute in the northeastern and southeastern regions of the country. As highlighted both in the Secretary General's report and in the recent report of the panel of experts assisting the 2745 Sanctions Committee, external dynamics linked to the conflict in Sudan continue to further strain the local security environment, leaving border areas vulnerable to cross-border movements, recruitment, and logistical networks involving related armed actors. Moreover, we remain attentive to the human rights situation. While serious concerns persist, we take note of the reported decrease in the overall number of human rights violations and abuses. We are encouraged by the slight decline in verified grave violations against children, particularly as this trend is recorded during the dry season, a period that has traditionally witnessed heightened levels of violence and insecurity. However, challenges remain, including continued recruitment and use of children by armed groups. Sustained humanitarian support must therefore accompany concrete political and security efforts. In closing, Madam President, the encouraging developments witnessed during the reporting period demonstrate that sustained national ownership supported by effective international engagement can yield tangible results. We remain convinced that continued international support, including through MINUSCA, will be essential to consolidating these gains and advancing lasting peace, security, and development in the Central African Republic. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I now give the floor to the ambassador of Panama. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Valentine Rugwabiza, for her briefing. We would also like to thank the Chair of the Peace Building Commission, His Excellency Omar Hilal, for the presentation. We would like to greet the representative of the Central African Republic, who honors us with his presence. Panama values the progress achieved by the Central African Republic during this period. The installation of the institutions of the Seventh Republic, continuing the electoral process, and progress observed in terms of the implementation of the political agreement for peace and reconciliation reflect considerable efforts to consolidate political and institutional stability in the country. We consider that it is especially encouraging that these gains have happened in a regional context that is increasingly complex. This shows the resilience of Central African institutions and the importance of MINUSCA and international partners' continuous support. At the same time, we believe that the situation on the ground is evolving, and it requires a strategic take that is adapted to this new reality. For years, the main concern was the capacity of major armed groups to directly challenge the state's authority. Today, we observe a context that is much more nuanced, characterized by important advances in the process of disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, and repatriation, as well as a decrease in large-scale violence in several regions in the country. These developments are an important basis on which we can continue building upon. Nevertheless, persistent challenges continue affecting peace building, especially in those areas with overlapping dynamics of local insecurity, illegal economies, tensions associated to transhumance, and a limited presence of institutions. In this context, it is critical to continue enhancing mechanisms that transform security gains into lasting benefits for communities. Panama also considers that the evolution of the conflict in Sudan is one of the strategic factors that is most relevant for the future of the Central African Republic. The events observed in border areas highlight the growing interconnection between national stability and regional dynamics. Therefore, we value efforts to reinforce state presence as well as prevention and response capacity in the regions that are most exposed to these risks. We are also closely following the situation in Omombu. The challenges in that prefecture showcase that peace building requires comprehensive responses that combine security, community dialogue, institutional strengthening, and opportunities for development. We highlight efforts to promote lasting solutions that contribute to enhancing trust between communities and state institutions. On the other hand, Panama reaffirms the importance that political and institutional gains observed during this period are supported by the significant participation of women in national and local decision-making processes, and this includes greater legislative and executive representation. Moreover, the persistence of conflict-related sexual violence highlights persistent challenges when it comes to protecting women and children, which continues to be an indicator that is key to evaluate existing fragilities and requires a sustained response when it comes to prevention, justice, and accountability. President, MINUSCA's reconfiguration is a natural step in the mission's evolution and an opportunity to entrench gains achieved during the last decade. Nevertheless, the success of this process will depend on existing conditions on the ground and reaching the common goal of preserving our achievements. In this sense, we consider that it is key to strengthen national capacities, to effectively extend the state's authority, and to gradually adapt MINUSCA's presence. All of these targets and goals should advance in a complementary and mutually reinforcing fashion. Peace building in the Central African Republic ultimately will depend upon the capacity to translate political and security gains into tangible benefits for the population. Panama reiterates its staunch support to the Central African Republic, MINUSCA, and the work of the Special Representative. I thank you. I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Madam President, We would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Valentina Rugabiza, for the briefing. And we are grateful to the Chair of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, Permanent Representative of Morocco to the UN, Omar Hilal, for his assessment of the visit to the Central African Republic. And we welcome the participation in this meeting of the Permanent Representative of the CAR. We would like to yet once again congratulate our friends from CAR on the successful holding of the general elections. We are convinced that in the near future they will manage to fully overcome the difficult period of armed conflict and to focus on internal development. The elections which were held are an irrefutable proof that the efforts made by the government of the CAR on stabilization are being converted into concrete achievements for the benefit of the people of the Central African Republic. Consistent progress also confirms the correct choice, the sovereign choice made by Bangui to work on an equal basis with all of its partners in the field of security, in particular with Russia, despite politicized criticism from outside. Tangible results continue to be delivered by the practical steps undertaken by the government to implement the agreement which was reached in 2025 with Chadian mediation agreements with the most combat-capable illegal armed groups. The number of fighters who have undergone the disarmament and demobilization process will soon exceed 1,500 persons. And to a large extent, it's thanks to this that colleagues from the UN are noting a gradual decrease in the number of cases of human rights violations and violations of the international humanitarian law. The activities of the remaining illegal armed groups, of course, continue to pose a threat. However, they are localized in nature and our sources are concentrated mainly on the borders of the country, in particular on the border with the neighboring Sudan. We consistently have been advocating for the earliest possible ceasefire and their transition to a fair political settlement of the conflict in the country. The acute nature of cross-border threats is such that it requires a continuation of support for the efforts made by Bangui to ensure border security, to strengthen national tools, to curb the movement of fighters and curb their supply with weapons. We welcome joint operations of the armed forces of the CAR and Chad to combat banditry in the border area between these two states. An important contribution to the cause of stabilizing the Central African Republic continues to be made by the UN Peacekeeping mission there. We support the leadership of MINUSCA and thank the military personnel of troop contributing countries. Peacekeepers carry out their mandates effectively, despite the measures they must undertake to optimize their resource and staffing. We call on states, including members of the Security Council, to pay their assessed contributions on time and in full, their contributions to the UN peacekeeping budget, and not to use their financial issue as a lever of exerting pressure on the Secretariat. In the upcoming period, the mission will have to play an important role in ensuring a consistent, phased, and orderly transfer of responsibility for the security sector to the authorized structures of the Central African Republic. And this process must, in all of its details, be coordinated with Bangui and realistically take into account the situation on the ground. We have no doubt that together with colleagues in the Council, we'll be able to take balanced and sensible decisions on the basis of the relevant recommendations from the Secretariat. It is obvious that support for Bangui by the international community at this important stage of consolidating achievements in the field of security must be continued. It is necessary, first of all, to take into account the priorities of the Central Africans themselves and not to seek to artificially accelerate developments. Such an approach will make it possible to ensure further progress and make it irreversible, so that in the near future, the focus of international assistance could begin to shift towards the sphere of development. Russia will continue to provide comprehensive assistance to the efforts of Bangui, including on the key issue of strengthening security. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement. And I now give the floor to the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Présidente, j'ai l'honneur.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the IA3, namely Liberia, Somalia, and my own country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We thank the Special Representative of Secretary General Valentin Rugwabiza for her briefing, and we take note of the Secretary General's latest report. We also thank Ambassador Omar Hilal, Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for his statement, and we welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Central African Republic in today's meeting. The A3 pay tribute to the women and men of MINUSCA for their continued commitment in support of peace and stability in the Central African Republic. Madam President, the Central African Republic has continued to show encouraging progress in its efforts to consolidate peace and to strengthen its institutions. The successful completion of the legislative and local elections, the inauguration of President Faustin Archange Touadéra, the formation of a new government, and the installation of the new legislature mark important milestones in the country's institutional development. We underscore the ongoing importance of fostering an inclusive political environment and protecting civic space to ensure that these gains reach all segments of society. The A3 commends the efforts made by the Central African authorities to advance peace, reconciliation, and state building across the country. Progress in implementing the political agreement for peace and reconciliation in the Central African Republic, particularly through the DDRR process, demonstrates the importance of dialogue and political engagement as tools for consolidation and sustaining stability. The disarmament and demobilization of former combatants who have rejoined the peace agreement is a positive development that should be further consolidated. We encourage the government, with the support of MINUSCA and its partners, to build on this momentum and ensure that the dividends of peace fully benefit communities across the country. We also recognize the valuable contributions of the African Union, of ECAS, of ICGLR, and other regional partners in accompanying national efforts towards peace and stabilization. Continued coordination between the United Nations, regional organizations, and the Central African authorities remains essential to sustaining recent gains and addressing remaining challenges. It must be said that the security situation has improved overall, yet certain areas remain fragile due to the activities of armed groups around mining sites and transhumance corridors, the persistent influence of criminal networks, and the tensions affecting the Fulani communities. In this regard, we reiterate that all security actors operating on the ground must scrupulously adhere to international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Addressing these challenges will require a sustained commitment to dialogue, reconciliation, and local conflict resolution mechanisms, as well as the extension of state authority throughout the national territory. Madam President, the conflict in Sudan continues to affect the security environment in the Central African Republic. The movement of armed elements, including those linked to the rapid support forces, the continued inflow of refugees, and reports of attacks affecting civilians highlight the growing regional dimension of the crisis. These developments underscore the need to strengthen regional cooperation, promote coordinated responses, and provide substantial support to national authorities in securing border areas, protecting civilians, and reinforcing state institutions in vulnerable regions. The A3 further commends the efforts of the government, supported by MINUSCA, to extend state authority, strengthen security and justice institutions, and to promote accountability and the rule of law. Progress in operationalizing courts across the country and strengthening local conflict prevention mechanisms remains critical to preventing a relapse into conflict and to fostering lasting peace. As the Central African Republic enters a new phase of consolidation, it is important that the progress achieved in recent years be preserved and further strengthened. And in this regard, the ongoing reconfiguration of MINUSCA should be guided by conditions on the ground, by measurable benchmarks regarding civilian protection and DGRR, and carried out in close consultation with the government. The A3 remain concerned about the impact of the United Nations liquidity crisis on the mission's ability to support national efforts in key areas, including the protection of civilians, the extension of state authority, and the implementation of the peace process. We therefore call on member states to meet their financial obligations in full and on time. To conclude, Madam President, the A3 reaffirm their full support for the Central African Republic and MINUSCA and urge them to resolutely pursue their efforts towards lasting peace and stability. We encourage the consolidation of a close partnership between the government, the United Nations, the African Union, regional organizations, and international partners to ensure that recent gains translate into stronger institutions, sustainable development, and improved living conditions for all Central Africans. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for his statement, and I will now give the floor to the delegate of the United States. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, and thank you to our colleague, the Permanent Representative of Morocco, and welcome to our colleague, the Permanent Representative of the Central African Republic. And of course, thank you to SRSG Rugobiza for your insights today on the situation in the Central African Republic, as well as your tireless leadership of MINUSCA. If I may, on a personal note, as many in the Council know, I personally witnessed the outstanding leadership of the SRSG and her equally outstanding team. I would ask her, Valentine, to please pass along my warmest regards to your Deputy SRSG, Mohammed, your Planning Director, Richard, and of course, our colleague, the Zambian General Force Commander, Humphrey. And please extend my best wishes to all of them and for your warm hospitality when I visited you in February. With the support of MINUSCA, the Central African Republic continues to make progress towards durable peace and security. In the past several months, we have witnessed the electoral process move toward completion, a new legislature installed, and the new government formed, all proceeding with general calm. Despite these important steps, persistent insecurity in regions of the country remains concerning. Spillover from the conflict in Sudan destabilizes the Northeast. Again, I personally witnessed this with the SRSG in February when we were 60 kilometers west of the border with Sudan in Birao. In the West, criminal activities and farmer-herder conflicts threaten, while armed groups keep the Southeast volatile. MINUSCA continues to play an important role in the Central African Republic, from supporting Central African authorities in advancing recent gains to providing a bulwark against lingering insecurity. But the mission cannot remain in CAR forever. We are encouraged by MINUSCA's efforts to consolidate and reconfigure its posture to implement its mandate more efficiently. This adaptation enables the mission to refocus efforts in high priority areas, while also transferring responsibilities to Central African authorities as conditions allow. MINUSCA's ability to develop and execute reconfiguration plans should inform how other UN missions conduct planning processes. Let me read that again. MINUSCA's ability to develop and execute reconfiguration plans should inform how other UN missions conduct planning processes. We look forward to the upcoming report on MINUSCA's long-term transition planning. In the long term, peace in the Central African Republic will depend solely on Central African ownership. Consolidating recent gains requires a sustained effort. It will take a clear commitment to the peace process, expanded demobilization and reintegration of former combatants, and broad security sector reform. It will also require dedicated financial investment from Central African authorities to assume MINUSCA's responsibilities. We encourage the recently elected authorities to take these steps to turn security gains into long-term peace and stability. As a council, we should support MINUSCA's initiatives to improve efficiency and transition into a consolidation phase. We encourage both the mission and the Central African government to continue to work together to develop concrete transition plans. With sustained political will, a stable, prosperous, and self-reliant Central African Republic is possible. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also like to join colleagues in expressing our thanks to SRSG Valentine Rugwabiza for her briefing, and I also appreciate the complimentary briefing by Ambassador Umar Hilal, Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, on the visit to Bangui and the important recommendations from that visit. And let me also welcome the distinguished permanent representative of the CAR to this meeting. Pakistan commends MINUSCA for its vital role in the Central African Republic under extremely challenging political, security, and financial conditions. We also pay tribute to the troop and police contributing countries and honor the peacekeepers who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Pakistan is proud to contribute more than 1,100 uniformed personnel to MINUSCA. Pakistan welcomes the successful and peaceful conduct of the legislative, regional, and municipal elections, including in areas affected by insecurity. And we commend the authorities, MINUSCA, and all stakeholders for their efforts in this regard. These are important milestones. We also welcome the inauguration of His Excellency President Faustin Touadera, the formation of the new government, and installation of the legislature. These developments offer an important opportunity to consolidate peace, strengthen state institutions, and translate political progress into tangible peace dividends for the people of the country. Pakistan takes note of the continued progress in the implementation of the 2019 Political Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation. And we support a nationally led, transparent, and inclusive DDRR process that promotes sustainable reintegration, that is linked to socioeconomic opportunities, and is responsive to the needs of the affected communities. At the same time, as we have heard, the security situation remains fragile in parts of the country. The spillover effects of the conflict in Sudan, cross-border movement of armed elements, and continued insecurity in the east and southeast underscore the need for strengthened border management and enhanced regional cooperation to prevent further destabilization. Madam President, many council members have referred to the vital and indispensable role of MINUSCA. Pakistan appreciates MINUSCA's concerted efforts in supporting the extension of state authority, protection of civilians, electoral assistance, rule of law institutions, and stabilization efforts under challenging circumstances. The mission remains an essential anchor for peace and stability in the country. In this regard, MINUSCA's ongoing reconfiguration and consolidation should be carefully calibrated and guided by ground realities, national priorities, and views of the host government, something that was also emphasized by the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. We share the Secretary General's assessment that reductions in mobility, aviation, and quick reaction capabilities could constrain the mission's ability to protect civilians and respond to emerging threats. Any adaptation of the mission's footprint must therefore avoid creating security vacuums and preserve the hard-won gains achieved over the years. Council mandates must be matched with adequate, predictable, and sustainable resources and operational enablers. The continued liquidity crisis should not undermine the effectiveness of this, which is one of the United Nations' important stabilization missions on ground. It is time to consolidate the gains. Pakistan reiterates its steadfast support for the Central African Republic and for its people, and MINUSCA in the pursuit of lasting peace, stability, and sustainable development in the country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor.
President, I thank Special Representative Rugwabiza and Ambassador Hilal, Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for their briefings, and I welcome the representative of the Central African Republic to our meeting. Since the last deliberations, the Central African Republic has made new and important progress in political transition, the peace process, and national governance. The President-elect and members of the National Assembly have been sworn in. A new government has successfully formed and embodies inclusivity, and the country has opened a new chapter in its development. China congratulates the country on these achievements. The international community should redouble its efforts to support the CAR in steadily advancing on the path toward peace, development, and prosperity. I would like to make 3 points. First, it's essential to support the CAR in consolidating its political gains. The completion of the presidential and legislative elections through concerted efforts is of great significance. It's even more critical to build on this momentum by strengthening national governance systems and capacity. China supports President Touadera and the new government in advancing the governance agenda, completing the by-elections in the remaining constituencies in a peaceful and fair manner, while drawing on experiences and enhancing the capacity to organize future elections. We recommend the positive efforts of the government to advance national reconciliation and implement the DDR program, and call upon all armed groups to abide by the peace agreement and complete the DDR process on schedule. We encourage all parties in the CAR through inclusive dialogue to continue to resolve differences and build consensus by jointly safeguard the hard-won peace. Second, it is important to help the CAR meet security challenges. At present, the security situation in the CAR is generally stable. However, some regions continue to face risks posed by armed attacks, transhuman-related tensions, and the spillover from the conflict in Sudan. China urges armed groups that are yet to join the political agreement for peace and reconciliation to immediately cease hostilities and join the peace process. Foreign militants should stop all destabilizing activities. We support the Central African government in strengthening its military and security capabilities while adopting a comprehensive approach to ease intercommunal tensions through dialogue and mediation, and expand state governance and public services. The international community should provide active support in this regard, help the CAR to fill a local governance vacuum, strengthen border management and control, and enhance its capacity to independently safeguard security. Third, efforts should be made to help the CAR address its development challenges. At present, economic recovery in the Central African Republic has slowed, and the development deficit is pronounced, and the humanitarian funding gap is enormous. China calls upon all donors to fulfill their funding commitments and ensure the smooth delivery of humanitarian assistance. The international community should take a long-term view and build on the resources endowments of the Central African Republic in agriculture, minerals, and forests, help improve infrastructure such as transport and energy, and support the development of agro-processing and other distinctive industries. Support for education, training, and healthcare should be stepped up to create jobs, improve livelihoods, strengthen endogenous drivers for economic growth, eliminate the breeding grounds of violence, and lay a solid foundation for lasting peace and stability. President, MINUSCA, faced with adverse impacts such as emergency downsizing, has optimized its deployment arrangements and made extensive efforts to support the CAR in election preparations, protection of civilians, and advancing DDRR. We welcome the establishment by the Central African government of an interministerial committee to plan for the transition and reconfiguration of MINUSCA and encourage the government to work closely with international partners to prepare for the gradual transfer of responsibilities by the mission. The Council should, on the basis of fully hearing the views of the Central African government, consider in due course the optimization of MINUSCA's mandate and size, taking into account the situation on the ground, and steadily advance its transition so as to avoid any security vacuum. As a good friend of the Central African Republic, China firmly supports its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. And we are ready to continue under the frameworks such as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation to deepen cooperation in various fields with the country and support it to embark at an early date on a path of lasting peace, stability, prosperity, and development. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank SRSG Rugwabiza and the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, the permanent representative of Morocco, for their briefings this morning. And I welcome the permanent representative of the Central African Republic. President, I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom welcomes the continued progress on peace and security in the Central African Republic, with the support of MINUSCA. This includes the holding of national and local elections in December 2025 and the disarmament and demobilization of over 1,300 ex-combatants since last July. We urge further efforts to consolidate progress. This includes a halt to abuses of human rights and restrictions on civilian movement by some armed groups. We call on all parties to uphold their commitments under the political agreement for peace and reconciliation and to work to translate recent gains into sustainable peace and inclusive governance. Second, the spillover of the Sudan conflict into the Central African Republic remains deeply concerning, with renewed armed activity along the border. The United Kingdom condemns reports of attacks by the Rapid Support Forces in Vikaga, resulting in displacement and human rights abuses. We call on the government of the Central African Republic to strengthen further state presence in affected areas and to work with regional partners to enhance border security to protect affected communities. Third, the protection of civilians remains a serious concern, especially in the Mubomu and Vikaga prefectures. Reports of conflict-related sexual violence and grave violations against children continue at scale. Women and girls remain disproportionately affected, while children are subject to recruitment, abduction, and other abuses. We call on the government of the Central African Republic to strengthen accountability, prevent violations, and work with the UN to implement national action plans. Finally, the United Kingdom reiterates its strong support for MINUSCA and its vital role in protecting civilians and supporting lasting stability in the Central African Republic. As the mission adapts its posture, we encourage the government to continue to work with MINUSCA and assume greater responsibility for its security and governance. And I thank you.
I thank the delegation of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank SRSG Valentin Rugvabiza for her comprehensive briefing. I also thank the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, Ambassador Omar Hilale, for sharing valuable insights from the PBC's visit to the Central African Republic. I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Central African Republic in this meeting. Madam President, I will make 4 points. First, Latvia takes note of the progress in the electoral process in the Central African Republic. We commend the government of Central African Republic and MINUSCA for their efforts to deliver peaceful elections, including in areas where insecurity had initially prevented voting from taking place. Furthermore, we applaud the mission and the UN country team for the support they provided throughout the electoral process, including in facilitating the participation of women as voters and candidates. Turning to the future, democracy requires constant exercise. We encourage the newly elected representatives and the new government to strengthen democratic institutions, promote good governance, and ensure inclusive decision-making. It is also important for people to see that their elected representatives are working to improve their lives. Newly elected local authorities need to be supported in their efforts to promote peace and development in respective communities. This is also crucial in the context of extension of state authority. Second, we note that the implementation of the peace process has continued, notably through the disarmament and demobilization of former combatants. We stress the importance of the DDR process being nationally led and of MINUSCA to continue supporting the government in its implementation. We also underscore the important role of community violence reduction measures as well as peace-building efforts in further consolidating peace and security in the country. Third, while recognizing the progress that has been made, we are concerned that serious human rights abuses persist in the Central African Republic. Conflict-related sexual violence and grave violations against children are among the most troubling. Violations are committed by non-state actors as well as by state actors, including the so-called other security personnel. We encourage the government to demonstrate its commitment to promoting human rights and combating impunity by implementing appropriate preventive measures and strengthening oversight and accountability mechanisms. We also note that Central African Republic has undertaken formal commitments to address conflict-related sexual violence. Finally, while the security situation has overall improved, it remains fragile. We are particularly concerned by the impact of the conflict in Sudan in the northeast and insecurity caused by the activities of the Anze Anikibe in the southeast of country. The reported incidents in these regions underscore the continued need for the protection of civilians and the extension of state authority. In conclusion, Madam President, we welcome the update on the consolidation and reconfiguration of MINUSCA's footprint in the country. The mission should be appropriately resourced to implement its mandate under this new posture that emphasizes increased mobility. For now, we consider the role of MINUSCA remains indispensable. Discussions on its future should be guided by careful assessment of the situation on the ground. Ultimately, the irreversibility of peace and security gains will be one of the key measures of MINUSCA's legacy. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Latvia, and I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam President. First, we would like to thank Madam Rugwabiza, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for the Central African Republic and head of MINUSCA. We would also like to thank His Excellency Mr. Omar Hilal, the Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Morocco and Chair of the Central African Configuration in the Peacebuilding Commission. We would like to thank them for their briefings. We would also like to welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of the Central African Republic in this meeting. President, in the framework of the current transition in CAR towards a phase of stability and with the beginning of the Seventh Republic, we have closely followed the second round of legislative and partial elections that was held on the 26th of April, as well as the entry into functions of the newly elected parliamentarians. We underline the importance of preserving these gains that reinforce state institutions and respond to the aspirations for greater prosperity and stability within the population. We also welcome the progress made in the implementation of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation of 2019, and specifically when it comes to disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. After the N'Djamena agreements of 2025. And despite these positive signs, we would like to express our concern when it comes to the fragile security situation in the west and east of the country, where the violence continues, with kidnappings of civilians, kidnappings of local representatives, and humanitarian workers. The Kingdom of Bahrain would like to reiterate its support to the Secretary General, who has called upon armed movements to immediately commit to the peace agreement. We also welcome joint efforts of local authorities and MINUSCA in order to reinforce the response in hotspots by developing information exchange mechanisms and activating early warning frameworks. We are also concerned by the repercussions for the Central African Republic of other regional crises. We call for enhanced regional and international cooperation in order to face transnational threats and to strengthen the capacities of the Central African Republic when it comes to hosting people who have been displaced and refugees, especially in light of the deficit for humanitarian and emergency financing. President, despite the financial and operational limitations in MINUSCA, which are affecting the services provided by the mission, we would like to welcome the new phase of gradually transferring responsibilities of the mission to the authorities of the Central African Republic, especially transferring the 7 operational bases. This is a reflection of the success of the efforts made in the framework of the Global Evaluation Strategy of Peacekeeping Operations in order to take into account political realities on the ground in the framework of available resources in order to enhance the state's capacities to carry out its sovereign functions. We call for more coordination efforts with the national authorities in order to adopt a common focus to reestablish priorities and ensure security, stability, and development. We appreciate MINUSCA's efforts when it comes to civilian protection and capacity building for the authorities and civil society in order to face challenges and ensure the security of humanitarian routes. To conclude, we have been made aware of the information presented by the SG in his report on the economic challenges that CAR is facing. We would like to reaffirm that the social and economic development of the country is the basis to fight against the structural causes of violence and the basis to provide protection for children and youth in order to prevent their recruitment by armed groups. Therefore, it is necessary to rely on resolution 2250, as well as Resolution 2774 of the Security Council. It is also necessary to support initiatives to empower youth and ensure that they have a decent life so that they may positively participate in the development of their society. We encourage the government of the Central African Republic to continue exerting efforts to implement the National Development Plan. We welcome initiatives for training supported by MINUSCA, and we also call for concerted efforts at the local and regional and international level to strengthen peace and lasting prosperity in the country. I thank you.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for his statement. And I shall now make a statement in my national capacity as the representative of Colombia. I would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Valentin Ruguabiza, for introducing the report, and the Permanent Representative of Morocco, the Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for his report as well. I would like to also greet the Permanent Representative of the Central African Republic. Colombia recognizes progress achieved in the electoral process that began in 2025 and would like to highlight support from MINUSCA and the United Nations system in order to enhance national capacities and promote inclusive political. My delegation would also like to welcome the call so that the elected authorities promptly assume their role as an opportunity to strengthen political dialogue, broaden civic space, and advance in the implementation of the political agreement for peace and reconciliation. In this context, I would like to underline 3 aspects. First, Colombia strongly condemns the violent actions perpetrated by armed groups, especially in the east and northeast of the country. And we are concerned by tensions associated to transhumance and cross-border dynamics that affect the civilian population. It is a matter of alarm that grave human rights violations persist, including conflict-related sexual violence and grave violations against children. My delegation reiterates a call for all the parties in conflict to respect international humanitarian law, thus ensuring rapid, safe, and unrestricted humanitarian access. Second, peace and security are inseparable from sustainable development, as well as the rule of law and human rights. Therefore, DDRR processes and the reform of the security sector should move forward in articulation with the strengthening of justice and accountability institutions. Professionalizing the national armed forces, along with training on human rights and protection of civilians, is critical to enhance citizen trust. To achieve this, it is necessary to address the structural causes of the conflict through greater economic and social opportunities, especially for women, youth, and former combatants. Third, it is important that the gradual transfer of responsibility to national authorities is done progressively, responsibly, and on the basis of their capacities. Preserving gains will demand sustained international support that allows for strengthening national institutions and supports the transition towards a greater national appropriation of the security, governance, and civilian protection functions. In this context, MINUSCA will continue playing a key role and should be afforded the necessary resources to implement its mandate in the framework of the current reconfiguration on the ground. Finally, and bearing in mind the approval of the third National Action Plan for Resolution 1325, Colombia reaffirms that the Women, Peace and Security agenda cannot be an isolated effort, but should rather be a cross-cutting approach that feeds into all peace-building processes happening in the Central African Republic. From preventing violence to national reconciliation, results will be more sustainable if they systematically include the perspectives, needs, and capacities of women. I now resume the function of Security Council President, and I give the floor to the representative of the Central African Republic. You have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, I thank you for giving me the floor, and I would like to first congratulate Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of June. I also thank Ms. Valentina Rugbabisa, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of MINUSCA, for her briefing, as well as for the remarkable work carried out by the mission alongside the government and the Central African people. And I also thank His Excellency Ambassador Mal Hilal, Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, for his statement and for the continued support of the Commission to peace-building efforts in the Central African Republic. Madam President, meetings devoted to the Central African Republic have long been dominated by one question, namely, how to prevent the collapse of the state. The question that should engage the Council's attention today is different. It is now a matter of how to sustainably consolidate the gains achieved after more than a decade of political security and financial investment by the international community. Over the past 10 years, the Central African Republic has moved from a situation characterized by the collapse of institutions, fragmentation of the territory, and contesting the state authority, to a situation in which the state once again exercises its responsibility throughout the national territory, where institutions function, where courts are present in all 20 prefectures, and where a full electoral cycle has been successfully completed. And these achievements do not mean that all challenges have disappeared. They do mean, however, that the nature of the challenges have changed. The Central African Republic is now faced with a classic post-conflict issue: how to transform security gains into institutional, economic, and social gains that are sufficiently solid to become irreversible. Madam President, comparative experience of post-conflict processes shows that there's often a gap between the reduction of armed violence and the effective consolidation of peace. The relative end of hostilities does not automatically lead to the disappearance of factors of fragility. On the contrary, the period following security successes is often one in which the most complex risks appear: resurgence of residual armed groups, community tensions related to access to resources, economic frustration, weakness of local institutions, and regional vulnerabilities. It is precisely in this phase that the Central African Republic finds itself today. The progress achieved within the framework of DDRR illustrates this transition. The issue is no longer only disarmament. It is now that of sustainable reintegration, economic inclusion, social cohesion, and the prevention of new forms of violence. The objective is no longer simply to silence the guns. It is to prevent their reappearance. And this is why the Central African Republic considers that reintegration programs, the reduction of community violence, youth access to employment, and local development must now be approached as full-fledged security investments. Madam President, The report of the Secretary General also highlights a major strategic development, namely the rise of risks related to the regional environment. While the main internal centers of instability have gradually lost their strategic disruptive capacity, threats coming from outside are tending to occupy a growing place. The situation in Sudan is in this regard a particular source of concern. The Central African Republic continues to host tens of thousands of Sudanese refugees, while also facing the security consequences of this conflict along our northeastern border. We're confronted with a reality that goes far beyond the national framework. The stability of certain regions of the northeast of our country now depend on regional dynamics over which the national authorities have only limited influence. This situation calls for a broader reflection on how peace operations must respond to contemporary cross-border crises. Administrative borders no longer necessarily constitute the real boundaries of threats. Armed groups, trafficking, forced displacement of populations, and the effects of regional conflicts ignore territorial limits. The consolidation of peace in the Central African Republic will therefore have to be conceived within a more integrated regional perspective. Madam President, this reality is particularly important in the context of the discussions currently underway on the future of MINUSCA. The government of the Central African Republic welcomes the efforts undertaken to gradually adapt the mission to the development of the situation on the ground. Any peace operation must evolve with its environment. A mission that does not adapt inevitably loses its relevance. However, adaptation must not be confused with weakening. The reconfiguration of a mission is effective only when it is based on a strategic analysis of risks and on objective conditions. In this regard, the Central African Republic wishes to emphasize that there is a fundamental difference between a reduction based on the development of the political and security situation and a reduction motivated primarily by budgetary constraints, and this distinction is essential. Discussions on budget reductions for peacekeeping operations are taking place at a time when several regions of the country remain exposed to persistent security risks, when the effects of the conflict in Sudan are increasingly felt, and when national institutions are still in the process of strengthening. It is important to understand that premature disengagement can sometimes cost more than prolonged but well-calibrated support. Prevention is always less costly than managing a relapse. For this reason, the Central African Republic considers that any future adaptation of MINUSCA should primarily preserve the capacities that currently constitute its strategic added value, its mobility, its air capabilities. Rapid reaction means support for the deployment of state institutions, as well as support for DDRR and the rule of law. These capacities represent not only operational tools, but also safeguards against a resurgence of fragilities that could undermine the progress achieved. Madam President, the Central African Republic is aware that peacekeeping is currently going through a period of strong financial constraints. We understand the concerns expressed by many member states regarding the need to ensure rigorous resource management, and we fully share the objective of efficiency. But efficiency cannot be assessed solely in terms of savings achieved. It must also be measured in terms of results preserved. In the case of the Central African Republic, the resources invested over more than a decade have made it possible to restore national institutions, to significantly reduce the influence of armed groups, to extend state presence, and create the conditions for a gradual return to democratic governance. The question today is therefore not only the cost of peace, it is also the potential cost of a reversal of the gains achieved. Madam President, as the Security Council prepares in the coming months to examine the future of the mandate of MINUSCA, the Central African Republic considers that this reflection is of particular importance, not only for the future of the mission, but also for the consolidation of the gains achieved over more than a decade of collective engagement in favor of peace and stability in my country. This reflection will take place in a decisive context marked by the expectation of the Secretary General's report on the strategic review of MINUSCA and the recommendations that he will formulate regarding the future of the mission. The Central African Republic welcomes this exercise, which is an important step to take stock of progress made, identify remaining challenges, and reflect on the most appropriate modalities for accompanying the next phase of our national trajectory. However, my government is also of the view that no analysis, however rigorous, can fully replace direct appreciation of realities on the ground. And this is why the Central African Republic wishes to encourage organizing a Security Council visit to the Central African Republic before opening negotiations on the renewal of the mandate of MINUSCA. Such a visit would allow Council members to directly assess the progress achieved, the remaining challenges, as well as the ongoing transformations in the relationship between the Central African State and MINUSCA. It would also provide an opportunity to assess, on the basis of direct observations and exchanges with national authorities, with regional partners, civil society, and the affected populations, the conditions which are necessary for continuing the process of stabilization and peace consolidation. And as the Council is preparing to consider the recommendations in the upcoming month, the CAR thinks that it is essential to make sure that Council members should have a direct assessment of the situation on the ground. This will help feed into the discussions on the mandate and make sure that discussions are based on the progress and remaining challenges. In this regard, the CAR remains convinced that the next phase of the United Nations engagement in the Central African Republic should be framed within a logic of a concerted, progressive, and responsible transition of MINUSCA. And in this perspective, a strategic committee has been established to support the elaboration and implementation of a concerted transition plan. The consultation framework, this framework will ensure close coordination between national authorities and the mission, identified priorities and national capacities to be strengthened, and will help prepare in a progressive and orderly manner the next stages in the development of the United Nations presence in the Central African Republic. We consider that the continued support of MINUSCA remains indispensable to consolidate gains achieved in the areas of security, governance, reconciliation, and implementation of peace agreements in order to prevent any reversal of progress made. It is in this spirit that we encourage the members of the Council to consider favorably a visit to the CAR in the upcoming months so that their future deliberations could be built not just on the reports prepared, but also on their own assessment of the situation on the ground. Madam President, the Central African Republic does not claim that the journey is complete. It affirms that this journey and this road exist. Above all, it affirms that the progress achieved in recent years has created a historic opportunity to transform still fragile security gains into durable institutional, economic, and social gains. The real challenge today is no longer that of rebuilding the state. It is that of consolidating peace. It is that of preventing any relapse. It is that of gradually transforming the dividends of stability into dividends of development. It is in this spirit that His Excellency President Faustin-Archange Touadéra continues to work with the United Nations, with MINUSCA, and with regional organizations, as well as with all partners. We remain convinced that the time has come not to measure the path traveled solely through the prism of past crises, but to assess realistically the possibilities opened by the consolidation phase in which the Central African Republic has entered. I thank you.
Doy las gracias a la delegación de la República Centroafricana por su...
I thank the representative of the Central African Republic for the statement. There are no further speakers inscribed on the speakers list. I invite members of the Council to move into the consultations room to continue considering this item. The meeting is adjourned.